Each deal is different and you will run into situations, but you have to take that risk. I started out with real estate wholesaling, closing deals, and now we're working on passive income. I'm proud, as the investor that's able to turn these deals here at one of the projects that we wholesaled. But in the meantime, while they were talking negativity, I was already writing a contract to get this one sold. I first came through here, everything was still smoldering. Expand your thinking, good quality leads with an equity position. It's not something that you do overnight. It takes time. Hey guys, it's Marcus Maloney and I want to welcome you to another video. And what I want to talk about today is something that every wholesaler, every investor has in their contract, which is the clause as is. And what I want to do, I want to talk about today the differences between the interpretation of the as is clause between the seller and the wholesaler or buyer. So let's jump right in real quick. We'll be real brief. And the reason why I bring this up is because this has come across my attention a couple of times. Actually, one of my first deals and a deal that we're working on this week. And what came up was the seller was asking about the as is clause, and I'll jump deeper in depth into that question in a moment. So let's talk about the difference. In most contracts it says, or it should say in your contract, that the buyer will purchase the property as is, where is, and how is. And again, that interpretation is different between the seller and the buyer. So one thing that is different, and you have to clarify with the seller, is when it says as is about the no repairs. So the seller is under the impression and know that they are not required to make any repairs to the property, that the buyer will purchase the property as is, which is true. However, the difference between that and the buyer or the wholesaler is that, correct, you do not, Mr. Seller, have to make any repairs. However, if the repairs are substantial during our inspection period, we can always cancel the contract, which is considered a contingency. If you don't clarify this contingency to the seller can become irate and furious when it's time to close that transaction. Okay? So the next thing is taxes, property taxes, and even sales taxes. And the reason why I bring this up is because one of my first deals, like I said a few moments ago, is that we got to the closing table and the seller did not want to pay their share of the property taxes when they were in possession of the property. I could have been the stickler and said, you know what, you have to pay your portion of the property taxes. Is stated in the contract, that during possession, that the seller is required to pay the property taxes or any back taxes during their possession of the property. The taxes were about $1,600 that was left over. And again, I could have been a stickler, but we were going to make a considerably more than the $1,600. So since I didn't clarify, I decided that we would eat that $1,600. Well, lo and behold, because we ate that $1,600, the seller liked us and really wanted to do business with us, and they had additional properties and they referred us to close on those transactions also. So if I was a stickler on that $1,600 and said, hey, this is what it states in the contract, you have to abide by what's in the contract, I could have lost the opportunity for other deals. But it is stated that the seller is responsible for the property taxes, but on the wholesaler's side, right, we're not paying property taxes when you own or was in possession of the property. Which is true. But again, you have to clarify these things during the time when you are signing that contract so the seller can be completely aware of what they're getting into. The next thing is liens on the property. Seller can sometimes be under the impression that, hey, you're buying the property as is, where is, you're going to take on these liens. And on this side, the buyer or the wholesaler is, no, we're not buying any property with liens or anything like that. And this comes up into play, especially in the Midwest, in Chicago, where we're doing deals, is because the attorney has to pull a water cert, and that's basically a water certification. And we've had deals where there were water certs up to $17,000 worth of liens on a property that we couldn't close on. So clarify with your seller that we're not purchasing any properties with liens, although it is stated in the contract. Again, that verbal communication definitely goes a long way. The next thing is buying as is, where is, say, personal property. This comes into play quite a bit when you're working with absentee owners or even seniors or elderly individuals. They don't want to move all of their possessions out of the property. One thing you have to do is you have to acknowledge and have them sign off on something that you, when you take possession of this property, that you take possession of the personal property also, if you want to do that. So sellers can be under the impression that, hey, I'll just take what I want and I'll leave everything else for the buyer or the wholesaler. And since they're gutting the property anyway, what is this? Property, no property. So they're under the impression that, hey, they're going to gut the place and have to have dumpsters and everything like that anyway, then they could just throw this stuff in the dumpster. Well, a lot of times your end buyer don't want to, use up a whole dumpster full of personal property. So this is a case-by-case basis. This is definitely case by case. We did a property, again, you saw the video where we had an older lady in Chicago. She couldn't move everything. She was 80 something years old and she was living with her mom that was almost 100. Well, naturally they couldn't move all of that property out. So we had to credit our buyer for a dumpster to remove this personal property. Okay? So again, clarity makes things a lot easier in your transactions. And then finally, inspection period. I'll just put IP. So the seller, if you don't clarify, they're not aware of the inspection period where you say, hey, I got a time where I can inspect the property, and if the property don't meet our specs, and this is after we have signed a contract, that we can cancel the contract. Well, sellers don't like to hear that. And it definitely puts the sellers in a bind sometime, especially if they are looking to move cross country or move somewhere else. If they're buying a new property, new home, and you cancel that contract, that puts them in an awkward position. But however, on the wholesaler side, if they can't find a buyer during this inspection period, they have the legal right to cancel that contract, as long as they have, a reason to. And normally that reason, it goes back to the repairs here. All right? The as-is contract, if you don't provide clarity, you can get to the closing table and lose your deal. All right? See you next week.